If the emptiness won't go away, God is still working. If you believe in God but still feel empty, this might unsettle you, because anxiety doesn't always mean fear, and silence doesn't always mean distance. Many people pray, trust Jesus, and still wake up feeling overwhelmed, confused, and strangely hollow inside. No clear reason, no obvious sin, just a quiet weight that doesn't lift. What if that emptiness isn't the absence of God, but the moment He's working deeper than your emotions can feel? Stay with me, because understanding this may completely change how you see prayer, peace, and the silence you're living in right now. When emptiness arrives without a clear reason, there are moments when emptiness enters your life without asking permission and without offering an explanation. Nothing dramatic happened. No clear loss, no visible collapse, no single event you can point to and say, "This is why I feel this way." You wake up, go through your routine, speak to people, fulfill responsibilities, and yet there is a quiet hollowness underneath everything. It does not scream for attention, it simply stays. And because it stays, the mind begins to search for meaning, for blame, for a cause that will make the feeling easier to manage. This is often where self-accusation begins. You wonder if you are ungrateful. You question your faith. You replay your prayers and ask yourself if you have done something wrong, if you have disappointed God, if you missed a step that everyone else seems to understand. But this kind of emptiness is not born from moral failure or spiritual neglect. It is born from transition, and transition rarely announces itself clearly. In Christian spirituality, God does not always work through noise or emotion. There are seasons where clarity fades before direction appears. The soul senses movement, but the mind cannot yet interpret it. This is deeply uncomfortable because humans are wired to understand before they surrender. But God often reverses that order. He invites surrender first, understanding later. Emptiness is frequently the emotional evidence of that reversal taking place. When former sources of stability lose their weight, the soul feels exposed. Things that once brought motivation, identity, or reassurance suddenly feel flat. Not sinful, just insufficient. This can include achievements, routines, spiritual practices, even the image you had of yourself as someone who was strong, faithful, or emotionally grounded. When these supports loosen, what remains feels like nothing. But it is not nothing. It is space. And space is where God does some of His most precise work. The problem is that emptiness feels like absence, so we rush to replace it. We distract ourselves, fill schedules, seek emotional highs, consume content, chase reassurance. But every attempt to fill the emptiness too quickly only deepens the frustration, because the emptiness was not created by lack. It was created by removal. God does not always remove what is bad. Sometimes He removes what has completed its purpose, and when something completes its purpose, it must loosen its grip for growth to continue. This is why emptiness without a clear reason feels so destabilizing. You are standing between what no longer fits and what has not yet arrived. The soul knows it cannot go back, but it does not yet know how to move forward. In that space, faith feels quieter, prayer feels heavier, and emotions feel unreliable. But this is not spiritual decay, it is spiritual recalibration. God often begins deeper formation by reducing emotional noise. When feelings no longer lead, awareness increases. You start noticing what you relied on unconsciously. You begin to see where your peace was conditional, where your faith depended on emotional feedback, where your identity was reinforced by external structure. Emptiness exposes these things not to shame you, but to free you. If you are experiencing emptiness without a clear reason, it may be because your soul is being asked to stand without familiar support. This standing feels weak, but it is actually strengthening. Muscles grow when support is removed. Faith deepens when certainty is quiet. God is not absent in this space. He is attentive, watching, allowing, working beneath the surface where you cannot yet feel the results. The danger is not the emptiness itself. The danger is misinterpreting it. When emptiness is treated as abandonment, fear takes over. When it is treated as failure, shame grows. But when it is understood as a transition, patience becomes possible. And patience is not passive. It is active trust in motion you cannot yet see. This emptiness did not arrive randomly. It arrived because something inside you is shifting. And what feels like a void is often the evidence that God is preparing room for something more honest, more grounded, and more enduring than what came before. The misunderstood difference between emptiness and loss. Most people confuse emptiness with loss because loss is easier to understand. Loss has a shape. You can name it, grieve it, talk about it. Something was there, and now it is gone. Emptiness is different. Emptiness has no clear outline. Nothing obvious disappeared, yet something inside feels vacant. This is why emptiness is more disturbing than pain. Pain tells you where the wound is. Emptiness leaves you searching for a wound that doesn't exist. When you experience loss, the heart moves backward, revisiting memories, replaying moments, trying to make peace with what ended. When you experience emptiness, the heart is not pulled backward, it is suspended. You are not mourning the past. You are standing in a present that no longer feels filled by what once sustained you. And because there is no event to process, no story to tell, the mind turns inward and begins to question your spiritual health. In Christian life, this confusion often leads people to assume they are drifting away from God. They think peace would be present if God were near. They assume anxiety means distance and silence means neglect. But Scripture and lived faith tell a different story. There are moments when God withdraws emotional reassurance without withdrawing His presence, not to punish, but to mature. Loss wounds the heart, emptiness stretches it. Loss comes from something being taken. Emptiness comes from something no longer working. That distinction matters deeply. When something is taken, the soul needs comfort. When something stops working, the soul needs adjustment. Many people try to heal emptiness with comfort, and it fails every time. Encouraging words don't land. Distractions don't satisfy. Even familiar prayers feel hollow. Not because they are wrong, but because they were designed for a different season. God allows emptiness when former sources of meaning reach their limit. This can include goals you achieved, roles you carried faithfully, or even spiritual frameworks that once gave clarity. They did their job. They brought you to a certain point. But they were never meant to be permanent. When their effectiveness fades, the soul feels unanchored. That unanchored feeling is emptiness. This is where people make a critical mistake. They treat emptiness like grief and start searching for something to recover. They try to go back to how things were, how they felt, how faith used to feel effortless. But emptiness is not asking you to recover the past. It is asking you to release it. Loss says something was stolen. Emptiness says something has finished. There is also a subtle fear hidden inside emptiness. The fear that if nothing fills this space, it will remain forever. The mind wants closure, definition, resolution. But spiritual growth rarely follows that pattern. God often creates openness before He brings clarity. He loosens before He rebuilds. And that loosened state feels unstable only because the soul is used to standing on structures that are no longer supporting it. Emptiness reveals what your peace was attached to. When peace disappears but faith remains, you begin to see how much reassurance mattered to you. When motivation fades but obedience continues, you discover a deeper layer of commitment. Emptiness does not remove faith. It strips it of its emotional padding. What remains is quieter, less dramatic, but more real. This is why emptiness should not be rushed. Filling it too quickly often delays growth. When you try to replace emptiness with activity, noise, or even constant spiritual input, you interrupt a necessary internal shift. God is not asking you to suffer without reason. He is allowing your inner world to reorganize around something more solid than feelings or outcomes. Loss closes doors. Emptiness opens space. Loss needs healing. Emptiness needs patience. If you treat emptiness like loss, you will search endlessly for something that cannot be found. But if you recognize it for what it is, a transition rather than a tragedy, you begin to stand differently inside it. and standing differently changes everything. Why God sometimes allows the soul to feel unoccupied. There are moments when the soul feels strangely unoccupied, as if something inside has been cleared out without being replaced. This sensation unsettles most people because we are conditioned to believe that a healthy spiritual life should always feel full of peace, purpose, certainty, or emotional warmth. When that fullness disappears, the immediate assumption is that something has gone wrong. But in Christian spirituality, unoccupied space is not always a problem. Often it is intentional. God does not rush to fill every internal silence because silence is not empty to Him. What feels unoccupied to you may be precisely where He is working most carefully. When the soul is crowded with explanations, emotions, and familiar identities, there is little room for deep formation. God often waits until the noise settles before He begins His most precise work. This is why the soul sometimes feels bare, not abandoned but cleared. Much of what once filled you may have been useful for a previous season. Motivation, certainty, emotional reinforcement, even the satisfaction that came from doing the right things or seeing visible results. These are not bad, but they are not meant to be permanent supports. When God is preparing you for a deeper, more stable form of faith, He may allow those supports to loosen. When they loosen, the soul notices the absence immediately. That absence is what you feel as emptiness. An unoccupied soul is uncomfortable because it removes the illusion of control. When you no longer feel internally reinforced, you are forced to confront what you truly rely on. Not what you say you rely on, but what actually steadies you when nothing feels certain. This is not a test designed to make you fail. It is an exposure meant to make you honest. God is less interested in how strong you appear than in how rooted you are. There is also a spiritual maturity that can only develop when the soul is not constantly reassured. Emotional reassurance can become a substitute for trust. When feelings confirm faith, trust is easy. But when feelings withdraw and faith remains, trust deepens. God allows the soul to feel unoccupied so that faith can exist without emotional scaffolding. This kind of faith is quieter, less dramatic, but far more resilient. Many people misunderstand this process and attempt to refill the space immediately. They add more activity, more noise, more spiritual input, hoping to recreate the sense of fullness they lost. But the soul resists, because the emptiness was not caused by lack of effort. It was caused by transition. You cannot fill a space that was created for transformation. You can only wait inside it until the work is done. In Scripture and lived Christian experience, God often creates space before He introduces something new. He separates before He assigns. He empties before He entrusts. This pattern is uncomfortable because it requires patience without explanation. The soul must remain open without knowing what will occupy it next. This openness feels vulnerable, but vulnerability is where formation happens. An unoccupied soul is also more receptive. When you are not distracted by constant emotional feedback, your awareness sharpens. You begin to notice subtle movements, quiet convictions, small shifts in desire. God rarely shouts in these seasons. He whispers, and whispers require stillness to be heard. The emptiness creates that stillness, even when you did not ask for it. If your soul feels unoccupied, it does not mean God has stepped away. It may mean He has stepped closer than before, close enough to work beneath the surface, where outcomes are not immediate and progress is not measurable. This kind of work cannot happen in a crowded interior. It requires space, patience, and trust. God is not withholding fullness out of cruelty. He is preparing a fullness that will not collapse when emotions fluctuate. The unoccupied feeling will not last forever, but its impact will. When the soul learns to stand without constant reinforcement, it becomes grounded in something deeper than feeling. That grounding is what carries you forward when clarity eventually returns. The quiet separation between who you were and who you're becoming. There is a moment in the spiritual life that feels strangely invisible from the outside but deeply unsettling on the inside. It is the moment when who you used to be no longer fits. Yet who you are becoming has not fully taken shape. Nothing collapses, nothing dramatic announces the change. But internally, something loosens. Old ways of thinking, reacting, believing, and even hoping begin to feel unfamiliar. This is not regression. It is separation. And separation is rarely loud. This quiet separation creates a tension that feels like emptiness because identity itself is in motion. You are no longer sustained by former definitions of yourself. You may still perform the same roles, speak the same words, and live the same routines, but the internal connection to them weakens. What once felt natural now feels distant. What once motivated you now feels neutral. This disorientation is not a sign that you are losing yourself. It is evidence that you are being reshaped. God often separates before he redefines. He gently detaches the soul from identities that were necessary but temporary. These identities may have been spiritual, emotional, or relational. They may have helped you survive, believe, or remain faithful during an earlier season. But when growth requires depth rather than function, those identities begin to loosen. And when identity loosens, emptiness appears. This is why the separation feels lonely. Others may not notice any change in you, but you feel profoundly different inside. You may struggle to explain what is happening because there is no language yet for who you are becoming. You are not who you were, but you are not yet who you will be. That in-between space feels fragile. It feels exposed. And it tempts you to retreat into familiar versions of yourself just to regain a sense of stability. But returning too quickly delays formation. God does not rush this separation because identity rooted in comfort cannot carry the weight of future responsibility. What he is forming in you now must be strong enough to stand without applause, certainty, or constant affirmation. That strength is built slowly, quietly, and often without emotional reward. During this separation, prayer changes. Not because God is distant, but because your language with him is shifting. Old words feel insufficient. Old expectations fall flat. You may find yourself sitting in silence more than speaking. This silence is not emptiness of relationship. It is intimacy without performance. God allows this silence because it removes the pressure to be someone you are no longer meant to be. There is also grief hidden in this process, even though nothing obvious was lost. You may grieve the version of yourself that felt confident, clear, or emotionally steady. You may miss the simplicity of earlier faith. That grief is natural. It does not mean you are resisting God. It means you are human. God does not shame this grief. He honors it by not rushing you through it. The separation between who you were and who you are becoming is not a gap God forgot to fill. It is a bridge under construction. Walking on it feels unstable because it is not finished yet. But stepping off it too soon only keeps you anchored to a past that can no longer sustain you. If you are feeling empty during this separation, it is because the old container has cracked and the new one is still forming. God is careful with this process. He does not reveal the full shape of what is coming too early because premature clarity would invite control rather than trust. So he allows the emptiness to remain, not as punishment, but as protection. This separation is not meant to isolate you forever. It is meant to prepare you to stand differently. When the formation is complete, you will not simply feel full again. You will be rooted. And rooted faith does not depend on who you used to be. It grows from who God is shaping you to become. And when God stops explaining and starts repositioning, there comes a point in the spiritual journey when explanations quietly stop arriving. You ask honest questions, not out of rebellion, but out of a desire to understand. And the answers that once came easily no longer do. This is often interpreted as distance or neglect, but in many cases, it marks a shift in how God is working. He moves from explaining to repositioning, and repositioning rarely comes with commentary. Explanation speaks to the mind. Repositioning shapes the life. God explains when understanding is necessary for obedience. He repositions when obedience must grow beyond understanding. This is uncomfortable because the human instinct is to feel secure before moving. But faith has never been about moving after certainty. It has always been about moving while trust is still forming. When God begins repositioning you, clarity fades not because you are off track, but because the track itself is changing. Old reference points no longer apply. The questions you are asking belong to a location you are already leaving. This is why answers feel delayed. They are not being withheld. They are becoming irrelevant. God is not ignoring your questions. He is relocating you to a place where those questions will no longer matter. This repositioning often feels like stagnation from the inside. Nothing seems to move forward. Progress becomes invisible. You may feel spiritually paused, as if life is on hold. But repositioning is not inactivity. It is internal alignment. God adjusts direction before He increases momentum. If direction is wrong, speed only creates damage. So He slows you down long enough to turn you quietly. In these seasons, emotions offer little guidance. You may not feel led, inspired, or affirmed. That absence creates anxiety because feelings once served as confirmation. But feelings were never meant to lead. They were meant to follow. God removes emotional confirmation so that obedience can exist without emotional reward. This is not cruelty. It is training. Repositioning also exposes attachments you did not realize you had. Attachments to outcomes, timelines, recognition, or the version of life you thought faith would produce. When these attachments are threatened, discomfort rises. Emptiness deepens. You may feel unmoored, unsure where you belong. But that disorientation is part of the repositioning. You cannot be redirected while clinging tightly to a fixed destination. God rarely announces repositioning because announcement would invite resistance. If you knew exactly where you were being led, you would try to manage the journey. So God allows uncertainty to remain while He adjusts posture, perspective, and priorities. The soul learns to stand without leaning forward too aggressively or backward nostalgically. It learns to remain present. This is where many people grow impatient. They demand explanation as proof of care. But God's care is not always verbal. Sometimes it is structural. He rearranges the internal framework of the soul so that when movement resumes, it will be sustainable. Explanations can comfort temporarily. Repositioning protects long-term. If you are in a season where God seems silent, ask yourself not what He is saying, but what He is shifting. What no longer fits, what feels unstable, what is being loosened. These are not signs of abandonment. They are indicators of movement beneath the surface. God does not stop explaining because He has nothing to say. He stops explaining because the lesson has moved beyond words. He is not withholding information. He is preparing placement. And when repositioning is complete, clarity will return. Not as relief, but as readiness. The discomfort of standing without emotional certainty. There is a particular discomfort that arises when emotional certainty disappears. Not fear, exactly, not despair, just the uneasy awareness that you no longer feel grounded the way you once did. The things that used to reassure you emotionally no longer work. Encouraging words fall flat. Familiar prayers feel heavier. You are still believing, still showing up, still trying to trust, but the inner confirmation you relied on has gone quiet. This is one of the most misunderstood experiences in Christian spirituality. Most people confuse emotional certainty with faith itself. When peace is present, they assume faith is strong. When anxiety rises, they assume faith is weak. But emotional certainty was never meant to be the foundation. It was meant to be a companion. God often allows emotional certainty to fade so that faith can stand on something deeper than feeling. When certainty remains, trust is comfortable. When certainty leaves, trust becomes intentional. Standing without emotional certainty feels like standing without a railing. You are still on solid ground, but the familiar sense of safety is gone. This is why the soul becomes alert, tense, and tired. You are learning to balance without support, and balance requires muscles that comfort never develops. God allows this discomfort not to destabilize you, but to strengthen what has been underused. In these moments, Many people search desperately for signs. They look for reassurance in circumstances, emotions, or spiritual experiences. They want proof that God is near, that they are doing the right thing, that this season has meaning. But constant reassurance keeps the soul dependent. God withdraws emotional certainty so that trust can become relational rather than transactional. You are no longer trusting because you feel safe. You are trusting because you know who God is, even when your emotions disagree. This discomfort also reveals how quickly the mind tries to take control when feelings no longer cooperate. You analyze everything. You replay conversations, decisions, prayers. You try to reason your way back to certainty, but faith that must be reasoned into existence collapses under pressure. God allows uncertainty so that faith can rest, not in explanation, but in relationship. Standing without emotional certainty forces honesty. You cannot pretend to feel okay. You cannot perform confidence you do not have. You show up as you are, tired, confused, still willing. That willingness, stripped of emotional reward, is one of the most sincere forms of faith. It is quiet obedience, and quiet obedience carries immense weight. This season also exposes how much identity was tied to feeling spiritually strong. When strength fades, you may feel less useful, less confident, less sure of your place. But God is not impressed by emotional strength. He is attentive to faithfulness. Standing when you do not feel reinforced is not weakness. It is maturity forming. The discomfort does not mean you are doing something wrong. It means you are being asked to stand differently, to trust without leaning on emotional signals, to remain without constant confirmation. This kind of standing feels lonely because others may not understand it. They may offer quick solutions, simple encouragements, or assumptions that something is off. But this is not a problem to be fixed. It is a posture being learned. God does not leave you unsupported. He simply supports you differently. Instead of lifting emotions, He steadies the soul. Instead of removing discomfort, He builds endurance. This endurance is not dramatic, it is subtle. It grows slowly, but it lasts. If you are standing without emotional certainty right now, you are not abandoned. You are being trusted with a deeper form of faith. One that does not depend on how you feel today. One that remains steady even when peace is delayed. This discomfort will not define you forever, but it will shape how you trust when clarity returns. Why emptiness often appears before spiritual maturity. Emptiness is often misunderstood as regression, as if something essential has been lost along the way. But in many spiritual journeys, emptiness appears not because faith is weakening, but because it is outgrowing its earlier form. What once felt sufficient no longer holds the same weight. The soul senses that familiar patterns cannot carry it forward, even though nothing visibly replaces them yet. This is not decline, it is development. Spiritual immaturity depends heavily on feedback. It looks for immediate reassurance, emotional response, and clear outcomes. When those elements are present, faith feels alive. When they are absent, faith feels threatened. Maturity begins when faith no longer needs constant confirmation to remain steady. Emptiness creates the conditions where this shift can occur. It removes the emotional rewards that once reinforced belief and invites the soul to trust without applause. This is why emptiness often arrives after seasons of growth. You may have prayed faithfully, served sincerely, or endured difficult moments with strength. Over time, those efforts became part of your identity. You knew who you were and how God worked in your life. But maturity requires flexibility. God gently loosens fixed expectations so that faith can adapt, deepen, and remain responsive rather than rigid. When emptiness appears, the soul no longer relies on habit alone. Old spiritual rhythms may feel flat, not because they are wrong, but because they are no longer sufficient. God is not removing discipline. He is expanding awareness. Faith shifts from doing to being, from performance to presence. This transition feels empty because performance once filled the space. Many people resist this stage because it feels unproductive. There are fewer emotional highs, fewer clear answers, fewer moments that feel spiritually rewarding. But maturity is not measured by intensity. It is measured by stability. Emptiness slows the soul down so that stability can form beneath the surface. Roots grow in silence, not noise. There is also a refinement that happens in emptiness. Motivation becomes purer. You no longer obey because it feels good or because it brings immediate peace. You obey because trust remains, even when reward is delayed. This kind of obedience is quieter, but it is far more resilient. It does not collapse under disappointment or confusion. Emptiness also reshapes expectations. You begin to accept that faith does not always feel meaningful in the moment. Some seasons are carried by memory, commitment, and hope rather than emotional clarity. This acceptance marks a turning point. Faith becomes less fragile. It can withstand unanswered questions, unresolved tension, and prolonged silence. Spiritual maturity is not about having fewer doubts. It is about being less controlled by them. Emptiness creates space for doubt to exist without dominating. You learn to live faithfully, even when understanding lags behind experience. This patience cannot be taught through explanation. It must be lived. If emptiness has appeared in your life, it may be because your faith is strong enough to survive without constant reinforcement. God does not deepen what cannot endure. He allows emptiness only where growth is possible. This stage is not meant to impress others. It is meant to stabilize you. What feels like absence is often preparation. Emptiness clears the internal environment so that faith can mature without distraction. When fullness returns, it will not feel as fragile as before. It will be grounded, quieter, and more enduring. And you will recognize that the emptiness was not a setback. It was the passage that made maturity possible. The hidden invitation. Inside the emptiness often feels like a closed door, but in reality, it is an invitation that does not announce itself clearly. It does not demand attention. It waits. And because it waits without explanation, many people misinterpret it as rejection or delay. But emptiness is rarely passive. It is an open space asking a quiet question. Will you remain present even when nothing is filling you? This invitation is uncomfortable because it removes distraction. When life feels full, it is easy to stay busy, productive, emotionally engaged. Emptiness interrupts that momentum. It slows you down. It draws attention inward. Suddenly you are aware of thoughts you used to ignore, fears you kept quiet, longings you postponed. This awareness feels unsettling, but it is also honest. God often invites honesty before he offers clarity. Inside emptiness, there is an invitation to listen differently, not for answers, not for reassurance, not for immediate peace, but for alignment. When noise fades, the soul becomes more sensitive to subtle movements. You begin to notice what pulls you away from trust and what draws you closer. These signals were always present, but fullness drowned them out. Emptiness amplifies them. This is why emptiness cannot be rushed. If you fill it too quickly, you miss what it was meant to reveal. Many people instinctively try to escape emptiness because it feels unproductive. But spiritually, emptiness is highly active. It exposes patterns that no longer serve you. It reveals dependencies you did not realize you had. It highlights where your faith was leaning on outcomes rather than relationship. There is also an invitation to rest inside emptiness, not in the sense of comfort, but in the sense of release. You are no longer required to perform, prove, or produce. You are simply present. This presence feels vulnerable because there is nothing to hide behind. No achievement, no emotional high, just you as you are. God often meets the soul most honestly in this stripped-down state. Emptiness invites a shift from control to surrender. When nothing is filling the space, you cannot manage your way out of it. You cannot strategize clarity into existence. You must remain open without knowing what comes next. This openness feels risky, but it is also freeing. Control demands certainty. Surrender allows trust to grow in uncertainty. Many people assume God speaks most clearly when life feels full. But often, his direction becomes discernible only after emptiness creates room for it. Guidance requires space. Formation requires stillness. Emptiness provides both. It is not the absence of God's voice. It is the environment where His guidance can finally be heard without interference. This invitation also challenges expectations. You may have expected faith to protect you from emptiness altogether. Instead, you discover that faith sometimes leads you into it, not to harm you, but to refine how you relate to God. The relationship becomes less transactional and more relational. You are no longer approaching God for immediate relief. You are staying with Him even when relief is delayed. Emptiness invites a deeper kind of courage. Not the courage to act, but the courage to remain, to stay present without rushing resolution, to trust that something is happening even when nothing feels finished. This courage reshapes the soul. It creates endurance that comfort never produces. If you are in emptiness right now, you are being invited, not tested. Invited to listen, to release, to remain open. God is not asking you to figure this season out. He is asking you to stay. And staying when nothing is filling you is one of the most powerful forms of faith. What changes when you stop fighting the emptiness? The moment you stop fighting emptiness, something subtle but profound begins to shift. Not outside of you, but within. Until now, much of your energy may have been spent trying to escape the feeling, explain it, fix it, or replace it. Fighting emptiness feels necessary at first because it feels unnatural to remain in a state that offers no relief. But resistance keeps the soul tense. It keeps you bracing against something that was never meant to harm you. When you stop fighting, emptiness does not suddenly disappear. What disappears first is the exhaustion. The constant internal negotiation quiets down. You no longer wake up measuring how you feel or judging the day by whether the emptiness has lessened. You stop demanding that the season makes sense before you allow yourself to live inside it. This surrender is not defeat, it is alignment. Fighting emptiness assumes it is an enemy. Accepting it recognizes it as a passage. When you stop resisting, you begin to notice that emptiness has boundaries. It is not endless. It does not consume everything. Life continues around it. You still love, work, think, believe. Emptiness becomes one experience among many, not the definition of who you are. That shift alone brings relief, even before clarity arrives. There is also a deep emotional honesty that emerges when resistance ends. You no longer feel pressure to appear strong, certain, or spiritually composed. You allow yourself to be present as you are, without explanation. This honesty removes shame. You stop interpreting emptiness as failure. And when shame lifts, trust has room to breathe again. Stopping the fight changes how you pray, even if prayer becomes quieter. You stop asking God to remove the emptiness immediately and begin sitting with Him inside it. The relationship shifts from problem-solving to presence. This is where many people encounter a gentler, more stable awareness of God. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just steady. God was present before, but resistance made it hard to notice. When you no longer fight emptiness, you also stop rushing meaning. You allow understanding to come when it is ready, not when anxiety demands it. This patience protects you from shallow conclusions and premature decisions. Many people make life-altering choices just to escape discomfort. Acceptance slows that impulse. It creates space for wisdom to form rather than panic. Something else changes as well. You begin to trust your ability to endure without constant reassurance. That trust quietly rebuilds confidence. Not confidence rooted in feeling good, but confidence rooted in resilience. You realize that emptiness did not destroy you. It refined you, and that realization carries forward into future uncertainty. God does not require you to like emptiness. He invites you to stop treating it as a threat. When resistance ends, formation accelerates. What once felt heavy begins to feel purposeful, not because answers arrive, but because peace no longer depends on answers. It depends on presence. If emptiness is still with you, consider what might change if you stopped fighting it. Not forever, just for now. Let it exist without commentary. Let God work without interference. The fight is not what proves faith. The willingness to remain is. Usually, if the emptiness remains, it's because God is not finished yet. There is a moment when you realize the emptiness did not leave on your schedule. You waited, prayed, endured, adjusted your expectations, and still it remains. This is usually the point where people conclude something is wrong, that they waited too long, that faith failed, that this is how life will be from now on. But Christian spirituality offers a different conclusion. If the emptiness remains, it is not because God forgot you. It is because He is still working. God does not abandon projects halfway through. What He begins, He completes, but completion does not follow emotional timelines. Emptiness often lingers because the work happening beneath the surface is not yet stable. Removing the emptiness too soon would expose unfinished formation. So God allows the space to remain until what is being built can stand on its own. At this stage, emptiness no longer means uncertainty. It means refinement. The frantic search for meaning has slowed. The panic has softened. You may not feel full, but you are steadier. You have learned to stand without constant reassurance. You have learned to remain present without rushing resolution. That endurance is not accidental. It is the result of work that could only happen over time. This is where many people miss what God has done. They focus on what they still feel rather than how they have changed. You may still sense emptiness, but you react differently to it now. You no longer assume it defines you. You no longer believe it disqualifies you. You no longer interpret it as evidence of distance from God. That shift alone is proof that something deep has been completed. God often leaves a trace of emptiness even after the season has served its purpose. Not as punishment, but as memory. A reminder of how to remain grounded when certainty fades again. Because life will bring other transitions, other silences, other moments where faith must stand without feeling. What you are learning now will carry you through those moments. When fullness returns, it will not feel like relief alone. It will feel like alignment. Peace will come, not as emotional intensity, but as quiet confidence. You will know where to stand even when answers are delayed. That kind of peace cannot be rushed. It must be built. So if the emptiness remains today, let it mean this. God trusted you with a process that could not be shortened. He stayed when you stayed. He worked while you waited. And He is still present now, even if the work is not yet visible. This emptiness is not the end of the story. It is the space that made the next chapter possible. And when God is finished, what fills you will not be fragile, it will endure.